So, what's the deal with your fantasies? Yeah, you know the ones. They're saying a lot about who you are, what you need, and maybe even what you're scared of. You probably have an idea, but let's see if you are right. Ever fantasize about being in charge? Or someone else taking over completely? Maybe you imagine a scenario where you call all the shots, or you picture letting someone else lead. These fantasies often tie back to how you feel about control in real life. If you're constantly stressed and juggling responsibilities, fantasies about surrendering control could be your brain's way of saying, "Hey, let's take a break." On the flip side, if you feel powerless in daily life, imagining yourself as the boss could help you reclaim some of that control, even if it's just in your mind. Fun fact, one study found that people with high-stress jobs often fantasize about losing control. Kind of wild, right? It's like your brain knows exactly what you need to balance things out. Let's talk adventure fantasies, like forbidden places, secret trysts, or meeting someone in the middle of nowhere. These fantasies often point to a craving for novelty and excitement. If your real-life relationships feel predictable, or let's face it, a little dull, your brain might toss in some plot twists. Psychologists say this isn't about wanting to cheat or break rules. It's about adding some adrenaline to your emotional life. It's like your brain shouting, "We need spice." By the way, if you're digging this dive into your inner world, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell. We've got plenty more mind-blowing psychology coming your way. This one's sweet. Fantasies about tenderness, closeness, or someone taking care of you aren't just about romance. They're about security. If you've been feeling lonely, disconnected, or even a little burned out, your brain might use fantasies to create a safe space. Interestingly, people with these types of fantasies often have higher levels of empathy. They might also be going through a tough time emotionally, so their fantasies act as a mental hug. All right, this one gets spicy, breaking taboos or crossing boundaries. No, this doesn't mean you're secretly a criminal. These fantasies often reflect curiosity or a need to challenge limits. Here's the psychology. Rules and taboos create tension. Fantasies about crossing those lines might be your brain's way of releasing that tension. Plus, let's be honest, humans are drawn to what they can't have. It's like when you're on a diet and suddenly cake is all you can think about. Now, here's where it gets deep. Some fantasies aren't about what you want. They're about what you fear. For example, fantasies about being judged or humiliated might connect to real-life insecurities. But here's the twist. Fantasizing about these situations can actually help you take control of them. Psychologists call this mastery through imagination. It's like your brain saying, "Okay, let's rehearse this scary thing, so it's less terrifying in real life." Your brain, total overachiever. Let's talk about the fantasies where you're not just the main character, you're the hero of the story. Whether you're saving the day, rescuing someone in distress, or showing off some secret skill you didn't even know you had, these fantasies are a lot more common than you might think. Psychologists say these fantasies are often about self-esteem. If you're feeling overlooked or like your contributions aren't appreciated, your brain might cook up scenarios where you're the MVP. Fun side note, researchers have found that people who love superhero movies are more likely to have hero fantasies. So if you've watched Avengers Endgame like 10 times, you're definitely not alone. Have you ever fantasized about being in a different time period? Maybe you're a knight in shining armor, walking through a medieval castle. Or maybe you're sipping cocktails at a glamorous 1920s speakeasy, dressed to the nines in flapper fashion. These kinds of fantasies are more common than you'd think, and psychologists believe they're often tied to escapism. When life gets overwhelming, too many emails, too much news, or just the general chaos of the 21st century, your brain might say, "You know what? Let's take a break." In another century. Time period fantasies act as a mental getaway, taking you far from the stress of modern life. But they can also reveal deeper longings. If you find yourself imagining life in a simpler time, like a small village where everyone knows each other's names, it might reflect a craving for connection or stability. Or if you're dreaming about being a high society aristocrat, maybe you're seeking status or luxury that feels out of reach in your current life. Here's something quirky. Researchers have found that time travel fantasies often show up in highly creative or nostalgic people. If you're the type who prefers vinyl records over Spotify, you might also daydream about living in a time before Wi-Fi and smartphones. And let's not forget the flip side. Some people fantasize about future worlds instead of past ones. Whether it's life on a distant planet or a utopia where robots do all the chores, futuristic fantasies tend to reflect a desire for innovation or a yearning for possibilities beyond the limits of today. Let's talk about the fantasies that keep popping up, like a song stuck on repeat. Recurring fantasies are your brain's way of planting a flag and saying, "Hey, this is important, pay attention." These fantasies often stick around because they're tied to something unresolved or unfulfilled. For example, if you keep fantasizing about being admired by a crowd, whether it's giving a TED talk or acing karaoke night, it might point to a desire for validation. Maybe you're feeling overlooked at work, in your friend group, or even by yourself. Or let's say you constantly imagine running away to a secluded island with zero phone service. This could mean you're feeling overwhelmed and need some serious alone time. Recurring fantasies about escape are particularly common for people juggling too many responsibilities, whether it's work, family, or even social obligations. Recurring fantasies aren't just about unfulfilled desires. They can also act as a form of problem solving. Psychologists call this rehearsal. If you're worried about something, like a big meeting or a tricky conversation, your brain might play out different scenarios in fantasy form to help you prepare. Here's a fun exercise. Try journaling about a recurring fantasy. Write down the details, who's involved, what's happening, how it makes you feel, and see if any themes pop up. You might notice that your fantasy isn't really about the fantasy at all. It's about your emotions, your needs, or even your fears. One last thing, recurring fantasies can change over time. What you dream about in your 20s might not be the same as in your 40s. That's because as your life evolves, so do your needs. A fantasy about being a rock star might transform into a fantasy about quiet weekends in the countryside. Both are valid, and both are telling you something important about where you are in life. The science of fantasies, why they're good for you. Fantasies are good for your mental health. They can lower stress, improve mood, and even act as a form of self-care. Think of them as a mini mental vacation. When fantasies are a warning sign. If fantasies start interfering with your life or feel overwhelming, they might be a sign to check in with yourself. Sometimes, they're your brain's way of highlighting areas of dissatisfaction in your life. Fantasies are like a treasure map to your inner world. Your wants, your needs, your emotions, it's all there if you're willing to look. If you found this fascinating, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more quirky dives into the human mind. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.